just FYI, everyone. And I will introduce myself, most of the folks I know on this call, but there's a few new people, which makes me very happy. I'm Sally Prendergast, and I'm the chair of the North County Coastal Group for the San Diego Sierra Club. And we have an executive committee that includes Amelie Kathleen, Barbara Collins, Paige DeCinco, Mark Jenny, where are you, John Eldon, Harold Standifer, 7 of us all together. And we're the group within the Sierra Club that handles the North County coastal area. So that's Del Mar to Oceanside. I also sit on the board of the chapter. So I represent our group to the San Diego chapter and work on some things relative to that. So we have a lot to do today. I'm very excited about who we have to speak. Councilmember Acosta is fabulous, and we're so grateful she's here tonight. Bryant Baker, I've heard speak before and is excellent, and I know the fire topic is on everyone's mind. So we're going to jump right into it. Let me just quickly, oh, sorry. I'm here. It's my my video keeps going out for some reason. Sorry. There we go. Just quickly, within our group, we focus on a couple of areas. Harold is the chair of our political committee, and he's responsible for getting us all organized and managing the political endorsement process. We also work on a variety of conservation issues. And we do work with Ron Askelin, who's here as our from our chapter. He is our co-chair of our San Diego chapter, and he's also the chair of the countywide conservation committee. And our goal going forward is to have our own little pod here in North County coastal area that focuses on conservation. So there's already a few people who have reached out, and anyone else who's interested, please reach out. And I'll put my contact info in the chat, and I'd love to talk to you about that. In addition, a subgroup within that area is the Zero Waste Committee. And so that's another one that a lot of people feel like is a great opportunity where you can just sort of get involved and you know, work on things locally and some of those zero waste issues. And again, Ron's got a really great team as part of the chapter. A few quick announcements. We have a new chapter director that is starting tomorrow. So we're very excited, sad and excited. Sad because Richard Miller, who's been our director for 16 years, will be retiring in a couple of months. And our new director, Mark West, will be joining us tomorrow. There will be an open house on May 10th at our chapter offices. And it will be an opportunity to meet the new director and some of the other board members from the chapter, as well as see our really cool new offices. So that'll be fun. And there will be information going out to everybody about that. So you don't have to worry about that now. I wanted to quick introduce Michael King, who is our associate organizer who joined us, what, like 6 months ago, maybe a little?
Almost exactly 6 months. Yeah.
About 6 months ago, and we're thrilled to have him. We're very fortunate that we've been able to have 2 organizers in addition to our chapter director. And Michael is specifically working in North County and was going to just give us a quick update on the what's going on Saturday.
Yes, so if you haven't heard already, and I hope you have because we've tried every way possible to tell you, we have a very significant climate action march coming up this Saturday. It officially kicks off at 11 at Waterfront Park in downtown San Diego. But we encourage you to get there earlier, around, between 10 and 11 if possible, because we'll have a table set up. We'll have materials for making signs. We might, practice some chants before we hit the road. The march will be about a mile through the middle of downtown, and we'll end up, where we started off. We will have a short round of speakers that represent a lot of diversity from around the county to start off the event. But we're hoping, that to really focus on the collective action part of this and the march itself. So if you have any way of making it and bringing your friends along, please, we'd love to see you sometime between 10 and 11 on Saturday at Waterfront Park. Any questions, or do I have time for questions?
Ron,
Yeah.
you're on mute.
Oh, just a quick question. I was thinking of taking the trolley, probably go to Fashion Valley, take the trolley. Any other advice? Can people take the coaster down?
Yes, I believe so. The coaster and the trolley are both really good ideas. I mean, MTS has several bus lines that also run into that area. I'm planning on walking. I live decently close to there. So if you live anywhere near kind of, Little Italy or downtown, where Waterfront Park is, it should be pretty easy to get to. But if you're coming from further, Fashion Valley is a good place to go, or taking the coaster, or yeah.
We'll take Roger, one more, and then we'll save questions for the end because I want to get to our speakers.
Great.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it works really well to go to La Jolla and catch the trolley there. You can get off at La Jolla Village Drive and just go down a little bit to the trolley station there and get on the blue line that goes all the way to Tijuana if you want. That's a really good option. There's a big park and ride right there.
Yes. And it's super fun on the trolley and the train. You meet lots of friends. Everyone will be jammed in there going to the same place. So one other thing, Catherine Blakespeare will be one of the speakers, our state senator from this area. So that's an opportunity to hear her speak. And I'm sure there will be an opportunity to chat with some of those officials that are speaking. So with that, we're going to jump into our program tonight, and we'll start with introducing our council member, Teresa Acosta. Paige, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Teresa Acosta was elected to our Carlsbad City Council in 2020. She's a born and raised Southern California girl. And she got her BA from USC and her MBA from Pepperdine. Teresa has championed sustainability, safety, and affordability in a variety of leadership roles in our city and the region and the state. She's been an active member of the Sierra Club, Surfrider, Bataquitos Lagoon Foundation, and Climate Reality Project. And she's the chair of the board of directors of the Institute for Local Government and a member of the Cal Cities board of directors. She is right now in Carlsbad. She's on our legislative subcommittee and represents the city on many regional and local organizations, including Cal Cities Environmental Equality Committee and Cal Cities Latino Caucus Board of Directors. And she has truly been our champion for sustainability in the city. So welcome, Teresa.
Thank you. I was having a little bit of tech issue earlier, so want to make sure that you all can hear and see me. Okay, great.
Yeah.
For some reason, I see the big version of me, which I don't love, so I'm just going to kind of look above the screen, pretend I can't see myself. I'm so glad to be here. I love Sierra Club, and I'm super grateful to you all for the work that you do and the community that we have created, this community of caring about our environment, out there, as you said, marching and speaking up. I want to give much gratitude and thanks to those of you who write in or show up. Paige is one of those, and there are quite a few other Sierra Club members and environmental champions in our community that show up to the Carlsbad City Council. You heard a little bit about my bio. people ask, when I got my start, and I can't exactly remember when I started really feeling connected to my city or the community that I came from, but I want to say it was when I was a little girl and we learned about cutting the tops of the soda can packs, so that the turtles and the dolphins did not get stuck in the plastic. That's back a long time ago. I haven't had soda in, decades now. But when I was a little kid, I remember writing an article about it for my school newsletter. And I remember my teacher in 4th grade sent it to the newspaper, like the actual print newspaper, the Pasadena Star News, and it ran there. So I think that was the first time I ever realized that I could make a bigger impact than just myself or my classroom. And my parents and family were always super encouraging, but I didn't think I was going to run for office. So in 2019, having established and run a successful business in Carlsbad and having been a professor at LaCosta College in the business department, a couple people asked me to run. That made me think, okay, maybe I will seriously consider it this time. And I'm so glad that I did. That was in June 2019. Before the start of COVID, I had already decided and launched my campaign to run for city council. And it has been 5 years now since I have run and won and run again and won again. So I want to thank you for helping me in my journey to where I am now. Paige kind of went over some of the things that I'm involved with. At the city of Carlsbad, we have had a lot of discussions about our climate action plan. You may know that this is the document that most cities use to guide our environmental sustainability programs. When I started at the city, we had 2 or 3 members of our environmental sustainability department. I don't know if you recall. It's a lot bigger now. Part of the reason is because there was state legislation that passed that SB 1383, which requires us to recycle our food scraps. We all have that now. We've got our 3rd bin. You have a gray bin for your trash, your blue for recycling, and your green for your organic waste. That is something that came through state legislation, and we were able to grow our environmental sustainability department because of that. Some of the other things that we have done besides updating our CAP and successfully rolling out the food recycling program, or the organic waste recycling program, are establishing our 4th community garden in Carlsbad. That from the very beginning, the first time I started coming out to communities talking about our environmental programs in the city, one of the things I always talked about was the community gardens. There had been 3 community gardens in Carlsbad, all in the north part of the city. And you may know in Carlsbad, a lot of the history of Carlsbad is based in the north, which is fantastic and great. And I'm a big believer in historic preservation and supporting historic neighborhoods. At the same time, we have residents all over Carlsbad that sometimes feel left out. And in South Carlsbad, the area that I represent, we have an equal number in my district. All the districts have an equal number, about 27,000 people per district in Carlsbad. And people didn't really feel connected. Part of the reason is because we don't have as many city resources in the area. We opened our first South Carlsbad Community Garden. So all the others, the 3 others, are in districts 1 and 2. We opened one in District 4 at Stagecoach Community Park. Just the other day, it was National Gardening Day. That was April 14th. April 14th, we cut instead of a ribbon, we cut a vine. And we were able to announce the opening of this great community garden. I'm a big supporter. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to garden because they live in an apartment, or maybe they just feel like it's something they don't want to do alone. They like the social aspect of being part of a communal gardening experience. There's so many great things about community gardens. So I was happy to be a champion for this garden and to push it through. And for those of you who are not sure if your work makes a difference, there's always that quote that says, you may think that, there's a different quote than the one you're probably going to think of, which is the Margaret Mead quote about, like, you may think a small group of committed people can't make a difference, but it's actually the only thing that ever has. The quote I like to say is the one about the mosquito. You may think that one little person can't make a difference, but if you've ever been in a room with a mosquito, you know that one little guy can make a difference in your sleep. So I've been that kind of person for things like community gardens and my fire station too, to hurry up and get it up and running. Sometimes we plan these things and the construction times stretch out and then they get delayed and delayed. So without a champion pushing, asking, when is this going to open? I'm watching, you know, I'm keeping an eye on this thing. When is it going to be open? Then, you know, it would take even longer. So I know I certainly was that for fire station number 2 and for the Carlsbad Community Garden at Stagecoach Community Park that just opened. So I'm super excited about all of that. One of the kind of side things that I do, and mind you, Carlsbad City Council is a part-time job. I run my day job still in order to pay the bills. I have a full-time job. I run a company that does public-private partnerships. But I volunteered in January 2021 to start an internship type leadership development program for local high school students. And it's because after I won, I got a bunch of calls from high school students who said, I'm inspired by you for whatever reason, you know, because I'm the first Latina, the first single mom, whatever. They read something about me or their parents were big supporters and they asked their kids to contact me or the kids contacted me and they said, I want to shadow you. I want to learn more about what it's like to be on council. I care about the same issues as you. Is there an opportunity for me to intern? And I said, we don't have something like that where you can intern directly with a council member, but I have created internship programs in the past when I've worked for other places. Maybe I'll just design something. So I did. I designed something with 2 of the college students who contacted me, and one from Chapman University and one from Poly, San Luis Obispo. We were able to put together a program 5 years ago now that every year takes about a dozen high school students from local high schools and teaches them about community leadership. I have them all speak to city council. This Tuesday, yesterday, none of them spoke, but a week ago, we had 3 students speak, all on the issues of their own choosing, but really teaching young people how to be advocates for the issues they care about, teaching them how to present a problem with a solution. Don't just complain, but you know, offer a way to solve the issue, and also, you know, how to speak up for themselves because everybody's voice matters. And I know there's lots of adults that are fearful of public speaking or coming to council and asking for something, but I'm starting with this group of young people. We also run donation drives for the 4 months every year that we're together, January through May. We actually like February 1st through May. So right now we're doing one making blankets for the animal shelter. It's actually San Diego County Humane Society based in Oceanside, but it covers Carlsbad and it's a no-kill shelter. So we're making blankets for the dogs there. Another thing we did was a gardening tool drive for the Carlsbad Community Garden. So those are some of the kind of activities that I'm doing to support what I'm doing on council. Specifically on council, I'm proud to be an environmental champion. As Paige said in my bio, my top 3 policy priorities have always been safety, sustainability, and affordability. And that just comes from my background as a single mom, really caring about Carlsbad being a safe place where my daughter can walk to grandma's house and I don't have to be worried. We come from LA, from Pasadena border area in Eagle Rock, and you know, wasn't always safe for my daughter to walk down the street, but it is here, and I want to make sure that it remains so. Another, obviously, sustainability. I talked a lot about that last night. We considered the drive-through moratorium last night. I don't know how many of you are aware of that conversation, but essentially there were some corporate chains in the area that wanted to overturn the ban on drive-throughs in Carlsbad. We've had a ban on fast food drive-throughs since 1998. Legoland really pushed it and got it through. And the 2 corporate chains that were wanting to overturn that were Chick-fil-A and Starbucks. It was very transparent and clear to me that that's who was there and contacting us, but they give a lot of money to the chamber and they support a lot of causes, and they got a lot of people to convince the council to vote to overturn the ban. There were 5 options on the table. Option 1 is to keep the ban. That's the one I voted for and was very strong about voting for that. But my council colleagues voted 3-2 to select option number 2, which is on a case-by-case basis. If the corporate fast food company is willing to put in the money to do a conditional use permit, they will be able to do that anywhere in the city. There's not even a zone anywhere in the city of Carlsbad, which is unfortunate. But I was reviewing the video from last night. If any of you want to see it, it's there. And I just wanted to call out that I mentioned our Carlsbad community vision. This is an actual document that we created as a community about 10 years ago, and we have reaffirmed, we've gone back out to the community, and amongst our top values that we as a community in Carlsbad agree on is sustainability. And what I said is, we came from LA, and I don't want our city to be a stop off the 5 for people to grab food from a fast food location and move along. We already have 12 of those, and I think that's not the kind of future we want for Carlsbad. I know, in fact, I said I think, but I know for me, and I know for the Carlsbad community vision, that we value our quaint beach town charm. That is a direct quote from the Carlsbad community vision. We value sustainability and our natural resources, and I want to put our community values first and foremost. I wrote it down, like what I said. I didn't have it written down before, it just came off the cuff, but I wrote it down because I thought about posting that again as something I really want to double down on. Our community values and the vision that we have for our city is so important. And sometimes these interests come in and erode that. So I continue to be a champion for our environment. I look forward to any questions that you may have. I know that there's kind of a lot going on. I'm also doing a lot of work at the state and federal level because of my background in business and with the League of California Cities, where I was an employee. Like, I went to work for a state senator for all of my 20s in the Pasadena area, and I did all the outreach for business, for labor unions, and for the Latino community. I'm bilingual, Mexican American. I was able to really understand how communities function and local government's important role in kind of all the levels of government in society. And I really believe in the power of cities, the government that is closest to the people. I'm so proud to serve on your city council and happy to talk with you about any questions that you may have for me.
Great. What we'll do now, there's a manageable group of people on here. I can look for hands that are raised if people have specific questions that they want to ask. I have one, which would be sort of, given the climate that we're in right now with the federal government and all the threats that are coming from every direction, but specific to the environment. What do you see are some of the, local levers you can pull, or what you can, do locally at our North County area, or even working with other politicians, whether it's Mike Levin or Senator Blakespear and whatnot, to help deal with some of what might be coming our way?
Luckily, I think that there's a lot that we can do locally to help our environment and to prepare for things like climate change, sea level rise, extreme weather events. I know there was a mention of fire preparedness and disaster response. Those are all issues where we have a role and we have a voice, a real voice. So those are certainly topics I'm talking about at the League of California Cities. So I sit on the board of the League of California Cities. I'm the second vice president. I'm in a role where I will automatically be promoted to first vice in October, and then in 2027 I will become the president. And essentially, this is the organization that represents all the cities of California. So we bring together all the diversity, 483 cities in the state, 40 million people, really just bringing us together to talk about our priorities. In addition to sitting in that executive role for the League Cities, I'm on the Latino Caucus and I'm on the Environmental Quality Policy Committee. And in those two areas, I look at the policies that come through the state government and affect local cities and local communities. So we're constantly looking at hundreds of pieces of legislation. Also from the city of Carlsbad, I chair the legislative subcommittee that meets once a month. What is it, the first Tuesday or third Tuesday of every month? You can find it on our website. Sorry, I don't remember the date right now. But this committee goes through any bills in any area: housing, homelessness, public safety, things to do with any issue that may affect our local city. We have lobbyists that help us filter because there's thousands of pieces of state legislation and big federal bills. And we work with all the representatives' offices. So at those meetings, we have a representative from Congressman Levin's office, Catherine Blakespear's office, Tasha Berner's office. We will bring in guest speakers. I think one of our next speakers is the PUC. I have issues with the PUC because I'm a big fan of rooftop solar. We are generating free renewable energy from the sun and putting it back on the grid, and the utilities are making money off of it. And yet they are charging us more and more, trying to nickel and dime us on the fixed costs. So I've been very involved in fighting back on the high fixed costs that the utilities are trying to put on us, but they are not done fighting renewable energies and fighting local CCAs, our community choice aggregates. And I know that there are several of you that are very involved with those too. So I'm a big fan of renewable energy. We have to keep up the pressure on the PUC and the governor, who appoints all the members of the PUC. But I continue to work with both our federal representatives and our state representatives. You may know Catherine Blakespear is the chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. And I attended her committee meeting last week in Sacramento and was able to watch her in action. But we are working closely together. It's one of my priorities is to not just think small about like what little things we can do to react to legislation, but I believe that we need to take a proactive role in taking positions and opposing and supporting legislation, depending on how they will affect us. And certainly with sustainability, environmental sustainability as a priority of mine, I am constantly tagging legislation and taking positions and making sure the city of Carlsbad is taking positions on those. So there's quite a few things that we are doing, and I'm happy to drill down. There's talk about that's kind of a big question, and I would encourage people to get involved and to watch us. You can come to City Hall and participate in the legislative subcommittee. If any of you have bills you care about and you want to bring up, you can come just like you would to a regular council meeting and submit your speaker slip and speak for 3 minutes about the issues you care about. When it comes to environmental issues, or even our legislative platform, which is the full document that we work from, that the city has approved, the council approved 5-0 as our legislative platform, which is our ideology on all legislation. Sometimes we get comments from a few of the bigger organizations. I never see really a lot of people from Sierra Club. I would love to see you because I love Sierra Club. But who's really active is Surfrider. They're really good at coming out and talking about some of their policy positions. So I invite you to participate in those as well.
Excellent. Thank you. We have one of the reasons why that doesn't happen, just FYI, is we have a policy group that's out of Sierra Club, California, that likes to sort of manage that whole process. Although recently that started to change. And our chapter chair is on that committee now. And in fact, we did spend some time with Senator Blakespear last week prior to her committee meeting about a bill in particular that we were concerned with, and then the ones that we were looking forward to actively supporting. So yes, that's hopefully something that we'll do more of as we move forward in the coming months. Anyone else? Any more questions? Now's your chance. Okay. So, well, I want to thank you. You are a busy individual, and I appreciate your taking some time out tonight and meeting with our group here. We are so grateful for everything that you've been doing on City Council, and have been happy to support your efforts there. So please feel free to always reach out if there's a need for us to really rally around something that you want our support on. So we're happy to do that. And
thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, to see you. I'd love to see you in person sometime soon. So hopefully I will. And thanks again for letting me come to your meeting. It's great. And I'm happy to be a Sierra Club member. I am a member. Thank you.
Yeah, just by the way, one of the things that our organizer, Michael, is helping us with is we used to do all of our meetings in person, and we're looking forward to having, some sort of combination or every so often doing in-person meetings so that we have the chance for people to show up and network a little bit. Oh, I see Susan Baldwin. You have a question.
I just wanted to thank you for trying to not allow more drive-through fast food places. I applaud you for that. I remember like 40 years ago in Boulder, Colorado, when we were talking about energy conservation, and that was one of the ways that we were, going to save energy and not pollute the air. And so I'm sorry that your side didn't win. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll keep trying. We'll keep moving forward, and I appreciate all of you being there in the, in this field with me, and whatever I can do to support you, I'm here for it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next speaker, and just so everyone knows sort of what's happening, we'll go through his presentation, and there will definitely be an opportunity to ask questions. And then if there's time after that, or people have additional questions that are unrelated to the presentations, just about ways they can get involved or ideas they might have for our group, whatever, we'll be happy to stay on as long as you want and chat about that. And again, before we're done tonight, I will definitely make sure my contact information is in the chat. And also, if the other, Harold, if maybe you could put yours for political committee, and our teams for Carlsbad, we have Paige DeCinco. Maybe if you could add yours, if there's anyone who wants to get involved in Carlsbad that's not already, and Barbara Collins as well. That would be great. Okay, so moving on, we are very happy to have Bryant here tonight. I was fortunate to see a presentation, it was probably a month or two ago, I guess, shortly after the devastating fires in Los Angeles, and was really impressed with the research that you've done. So I was glad that you agreed to come out and talk to our group tonight. Everyone knows this is going to be a hot topic. So just by way of introduction, Bryant is the Director of Conservation and Research for the Los Padres ForestWatch. He's got over a decade of experience in land and water conservation, community outreach, and ecology research. He holds a master's and a bachelor's in environmental, soil, and water science. He's published multiple peer-reviewed scientific papers, is also a GIS analyst, cartographer, award-winning photographer, and videographer, whose work has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, San Diego Tribune, Oregon Public Broadcasting, Montana Free Press, Mother Jones, several books, and feature-length documentary about wildfire in the Western United States. So I will say, we still are in the foggy, cloudy time, and my app, the Watch Duty app, has already been going off multiple times over the past couple of days. So your presentation can't come soon enough. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sally, and thanks for having me here. I am always happy to talk about fire. It is the issue that takes up probably most of my brain space, and it's what I work on the most at Los Padres ForestWatch. And just so you know, Los Padres ForestWatch, we're a nonprofit. We've been around for 20 years. We're based in Santa Barbara, and we work to protect the Los Padres National Forest and some other public lands in that area. But we often work on issues that are more broadly applicable to Southern California, and in some ways California, the state entirely. And that has a lot to do with the fact that the Los Padres National Forest, kind of like the Cleveland National Forest in your area, is mostly dominated by chaparral. And so it's a little bit different than other national forests. And I'm going to get into that and about that ecosystem and how fire sort of operates there. So let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Cool. You can all see my screen. I'm going to just assume that you can. I think it's looking good. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about fire ecology and community protection in Southern California. That is a massive topic, and I have quite a few slides that maybe we'll get through. Maybe we won't get through all of them. I'm not really sure just yet, but I've got my big giant timer going on my other screen here that's countdown for how much time I've got left. So we'll see what we can get through. So chaparral, as people who live in San Diego County, I assume that's most of you live in San Diego County. You live somewhere probably along the coast. You are probably familiar with chaparral as an ecosystem. It is this shrub-dominated ecosystem, mostly shrubs that are evergreen. So they're not deciduous. They don't lose all their leaves at once. They do lose leaves, but not all at one time in the year. And it's this just really amazing ecosystem that is unlike most of the rest of the country. And there are only a few other places on Earth that have similar ecosystems in these Mediterranean climates. And it comprises 9% of the state of California's vegetation, but it's home to 20% of its plant species. So it is very biodiverse. It's an extremely important ecosystem, and it is very misunderstood. And I say that knowing that for the last couple of decades, there have been some really great efforts to try to increase the understanding amongst the general public about what chaparral is and why it's important. So if you guys have heard of the California Chaparral Institute, Rick Halsey, he has done a ton of work over the last couple of decades, and I've known him for quite some time now, and have worked with him and written some stuff with him. And so there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and I still am amazed by how much misinformation is out there and just how much people don't really understand or appreciate this ecosystem. So let's just right off the bat, let's talk about what you might call the natural or the historical fire regime of chaparral. And I say natural or historical. Natural is a little bit, it's tricky. It's really hard to go back to like a pre-human settlement time and really understand what was going on before humans. So a lot of times when we talk about the natural fire regime, what we really mean is like the pre-colonization fire regime. That would be maybe the more apt way to put it. And so what we know, though, and I'm going to talk about how we know some of this, is that given a given area that is dominated by chaparral in Southern California would have burned historically once every 30 to 100 plus years. So that could be up to 150 years. It could be more. It's really hard to say what the maximum amount of time would be between any two fires in a given area. But we know that fires were not super common. They weren't commonly occurring less than 30 years apart in the same spot. Most area, like today, like in the modern times, most area that burned in any given year would have done so under these wind-driven conditions like Santa Ana winds, and they would have been fairly large and covered a big chunk of the landscape all at once. The other thing that's really important to understand is that we talk about like in forested ecosystems. So we think about conifer forests that you find in the Sierra Nevada. We often talk about mixed severity fire. So fire can occur as like this understory fire where it doesn't kill much of the above ground vegetation, or it can occur sort of patchy, and there's some areas have high intensity where everything is killed. In chaparral, it is high intensity. That is the norm. There is no real understory fires that occur in chaparral. It just doesn't work that way. And what we know from historical evidence that we find in this is a really good paper that I think has been pretty important for understanding the pre-colonization fire regime and really pre-fire suppression. This is the other era I didn't mention. So we talk about like pre-colonization, but also pre-fire suppression. So the fire suppression era, you can think of that as the last 100 or so years. It differs in different places, but we really started doing more like the Forest Service, for example, really started focusing on fire suppression in the early 1900s. But I'll talk about that. There's some caveats there. So if we go back in time by using sediment layers in like the Santa Barbara Basin, so that's this area here, right? If we take a core of sediment and we slice it up into a bunch of layers, we can look for charcoal deposits. And I say we, I'm using the sort of, I don't know what to call it, the royal scientific we. But the folks who actually worked on this, what they did was they looked for layers of charcoal, and they compared. So we know fires that occurred over the last 100 years or so. We have good records of those, the big ones that would have deposited charcoal. You can see all the smoke sort of coming out over the Santa Barbara Basin here, the Santa Barbara Channel. All that is dropped. Some of that is dropping into the ocean, and that's what deposits these charcoal layers. So they were able to come up with essentially like a correlation. You know, when they see a certain amount of charcoal of a certain size, they and it was correlated with this 1 year where we know there was this big fire, that they can then sort of go back in time where we don't know what fires occurred, but because of those charcoal layers, we can surmise that those fires were of a certain size. And so what you're seeing here is going back 560 years, and this was in 1999. So this is half a millennium here. Every single arrow you see here, that was a 50,000 acre plus fire. That means we know it was at least 50,000 acres. It was possibly much bigger. We don't really know what that sort of max size it could have been. But we know that these were large fires that were occurring. And this was regardless of pre-colonization, post-colonization, even the fire suppression era, we still have these large fires. And what they found was that on average, one of these large fires was occurring once every 20 years or so, not in the same spot necessarily, just somewhere on the landscape where Santa Ana winds would push that smoke out over the basin and cause these charcoal deposits to develop. Okay, so that's really important. Now, there's other research that has looked at big cone Douglas fir stands. This is a really cool tree that's endemic to Southern California and down into Baja California. This is a tree that really occurs in these sort of distinct populations surrounded by chaparral generally. And so some of the ways we know about what's going on across the landscape in this chaparral dominated landscape is we can look at things like tree ring records in these big cone Douglas firs. And what these researchers found was that I won't go through all the like detailed, what they found, but just here's one of their concluding statements. As in recent decades, past widespread fires were likely driven by extreme winds and drought conditions. So there were large, extensive landscape scale fires historically, just as there are today. Now, I want to talk about why does all of this occur? Why does it happen? And why does chaparral burn the way it does? Because there's this issue I find where people still think that maybe chaparral doesn't have to burn a certain way. Like maybe it doesn't have to be so intense. Maybe, it can be like an understory burn. I want you to look at this picture. This is relatively mature chaparral. This is mostly ceanothus, one type of ceanothus crassifolius, and then some chamise here. And look at the way that all of the shrub canopies are touching, and they're also touching the ground, right? So when a fire comes through, there really isn't this understory that is, like it's the ground is separated from the bottom of the canopy layer. Everything is very bunched together. It's very dense, and it's dense both horizontally and vertically. That is completely normal. That is exactly what we want to see in chaparral. That is how it grows. There's nothing unusual about that. People will often call this like dense brush, but I really cannot stress this enough. This is how it's supposed to look. And it is inherently, because of that, it is quite a flammable system, right? When a fire does get going, it very easily moves through this system and it burns most of that above ground biomass. So in the immediate post-fire landscape, this is what you see, and it is quite shocking, especially if you just move here from somewhere else and you're not familiar with chaparral or wildfire in general. This is what a lot of people will talk about. It looks nuked, or it looks like a bomb went off. I would avoid that kind of language, because what it does is it makes people think that this is not how how it's supposed to work. But when a fire goes through Chaparral, this is actually exactly what it should look like. And it's what we want to see, because it means that several things happened during that fire that make it poised for good recovery. Okay. And there's caveats to that too, and I'll talk about those. So I want you to just look at this. This is a photo I took after a fire near Santa Barbara in 2019. This was just a week or so after the fire, a couple weeks after the fire. And we see this when we go back through old photos as far back as we can go. A lot of these are from the early 1900s or maybe late 1800s. We can see these exact same landscapes, these post-fire landscapes. This is not an unusual thing that has just started happening over the last few decades because of this or that. This is, again, how Chaparral burns, right? And there's been a lot of discussion, especially in the 1990s and the early 2000s. There was actually going back to the mid-century, I would say, there was this perception that, okay, we started putting out all the fires, all the smaller fires starting in the early 1900s. And then sometime, like let's say 1985, we start seeing some big fires happening. And it's because we put out all these small fires, right? Like all these small fires that we've put out over the last several decades, those would have prevented these larger fires in the more contemporary era. They would have prevented those from ever happening, right? Because they would have kept reducing the fuel and made it all patchy. But there's been a lot of work that has shown that that's not actually true. And so there's kind of these two schools of thought that were duking it out in the scientific literature. And I would say this is the one that is predominant. This is the one that sort of came out on top and is the consensus view here, is that even though we did put out small fires in Southern California, in Chaparral, over many decades, and we still put out most small fires, that has not prevented the occurrence of large fires. And that's because large fires occur not because of the fuel conditions, like the amount of vegetation you have, the amount of chaparral, how old it is. They occur because of extreme dry conditions and extreme wind conditions and an ignition all coinciding together. And if we look back, there's this really seminal paper about all this from 2009. And what one of the things they found was that there was this fire called the Santiago Canyon Fire, and this is in your region, a little maybe north. I'm not entirely sure where all of you are located, but this is Orange County and San Diego County down here, and this was a 300,000 acre. That's the minimum estimate. It's about 300,000 acres. It could have been up to close to 400,000 acres. We're not entirely sure. We don't have a good fire perimeter in the records, but based on all the evidence, this is still the largest fire that is known to have occurred in Southern California. And this was 1889, long before we started suppressing fires. And so I just want to make sure that is clear. And if we look over time, these are all fires from Southern California. I just took every fire that was at least 100,000 acres, or conversely, it could be less than 100,000 acres, but it destroyed more than 100 structures. And what you'll notice across all these fires, there's a lot of similarities, right? Santa Ana winds are a major, major part of this. Almost all of these fires were driven by Santa Ana winds. Some of the ones that weren't in like Santa Barbara County, those are driven by a different extreme wind condition called sundowner winds. There are only a few fires that haven't been associated with Santa Ana winds, but have been very large. Those are usually in really extreme remote terrain areas under very hot, dry conditions, like single-digit humidity, and they were more terrain-driven than anything. And I just want you to also note that the two most destructive fires that we have ever had, as far as the way we determine destruction, the Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire of this year, not very large fires in the grand scheme of things. These were sort of small to mid-sized fires when you look at all of the fires that have occurred in Southern California over the last 100 years or so. But they destroyed a lot of homes, entire communities, because of Santa Ana winds pushing them into urban areas very quickly and overwhelming any sort of fire suppression efforts. And again, I just want to drive this home a little bit more. We think of fires in the modern era as being entirely unusual. They're not. something is superlative about them. And I do think there are superlative fires in the terms of community destruction. That is unquestionably true. But when we look at fire size, there's not a clear pattern. The only pattern that we really see is that we're seeing more large fires, but not necessarily that we're seeing larger fires than what has occurred historically. I do want to point out, though, there's a lot of data we don't have, especially pre-1950. The records become very shoddy, and it's extremely difficult to fill in a lot of gaps here. It's usually the really big fires get pretty well recorded, but some of these other fires don't get as well recorded. Okay, and these are all just Southern California fires over the last 150 years. So I want to go back to this. This is really important. So this is what it looks like right after a fire. And I don't want to give you guys some sort of, I want this to be a little bit hopeful too. Sometimes these presentations come off as too much despair. And so I just want you to know that when everything goes right, when there's enough time between fires and when a fire occurs the way it should in Chaparral, it's a very beautiful process that you see play out after the fire, this regrowth process. This is just the first 17 months after a fire in the Santa Barbara area, in the Santa Ynez Mountains. And it's a really amazing thing to see. This is all that you see are native plants here. A lot of them are endemic plants that only occur right after fire for a couple of years. This is another area where I think this really shows how a lot of things that look very, very dead after a fire are maybe not dead at all. You can see these big charred stems. A lot of these are like ceanothus, greenbark ceanothus, or hollyleaf cherry, or toyon. These are all plants that are actually alive. Even in this photo, on this side of the image, those are still alive. And you can see here where a lot of those same shrubs are resprouting. And that's because a lot of plants have this ability to resprout from their basal burl or these underground root structures. And again, there are plants that we only see right after fire for just a year or two, like this giant flowered Phacelia, really gorgeous endemic fire follower. And again, it can be a very beautiful process if it all goes the way that it should. To understand some of the issues around fire ecologically, you really have to understand this slide right here. And it's pretty easy, actually. There are three main categories of, I would say, post-fire regrowth strategies that most of our plants, they fall into one of these three categories, most of the plants that you find in Chaparral. So there are obligate seeders. These are plants that when a fire comes through, it kills all of the adults, but it stimulates the germination of a very large dormant seed bank. Sometimes the seed bank isn't fully dormant, maybe it's semi-dormant. Really good examples of this are a bunch of ceanothus species and a bunch of manzanita species. So you can see that here where you got a bunch of all these seedlings coming up. Those are all the same species as this stump that we see here. That was killed by the fire, this particular species of ceanothus, but all of its seeds that it had been putting in the soil that survive being eaten and things like that, they are able to germinate in response to high heat specifically. Other plants germinate in response to chemicals from smoke or chemicals from charred wood. There, on the other end of the spectrum, are obligate resprouters. These are plants that when a fire comes through, it usually doesn't kill most of the adult population. Most of them survive and they're able to resprout, like hollyleaf cherry or toyon, other types of ceanothus or manzanita. Some can resprout. And they don't have big dormant seed banks. They usually don't have any dormancy at all in their seeds. And so we don't see them come up from seed after a fire, but we do see them resprout. And then there's this middle group called the facultative seeders. These are plants that can both resprout and they come up from seed. Chamise is a very good example of this, very common native shrub in Chaparral. And you will see seedlings, abundant seedlings, and resprouting in the post-fire area. The reason I want you to understand this is because the plants that fall into that obligate cedar category, they're the ones that have the hardest time dealing with overly frequent fire. So fire that comes through, a fire comes through and it stimulates that whole seed bank and they start to grow. And then another fire comes through before all of those plants are able to get to maturity and start producing a new seed bank. We can see something called type conversion start to take place in that situation. This is a really good example of an area that burned in 2009 near Santa Barbara, and then it burned again in 2017. So it was what is that? 8 years between the two fires, right? And this photo I took in 2020. And you can see that all of these ceanothus, these are native ceanothus, it's called big pod ceanothus. They are an obligate cedar. They were, all of these stems you see, they came up after the 2009 fire, but after the 2017 fire, they died, which was expected, but there's no seedlings that have come up by that point, and they won't come up because there wasn't a seed bank in the soil at all, because none of these plants had grown up to maturity. That is really, really important to understand, because it starts to help you realize that when we have fires occurring too frequently in a given area, we start to lose native species of these shrubs, and they start to get replaced with non-native species, usually grasses like wild oats or mustard, certain weeds. And so this is not one of my photos. This is by Steve Davis from Pepperdine University, but this is in the Santa Monica Mountains, where this has been a major, major issue. And you can see this is what chaparral looks like under normal scenario. And this is what it looks like when it has burned multiple times in just a little over a decade. And it starts to become this kind of savanna grassland-like landscape. And that is actually a much more flammable landscape than this one. When you think about it from an ignition perspective, this is much more ignitable. This is another example of what this kind of looks like from right on the ground. Where it becomes this more savanna-like system. And all of that, most of the plant material there that is between the shrubs is non-native grasses and weeds. And those invasive non-native grasses, they can actually increase fire occurrence and frequency. And we're seeing this across the US. This isn't just in Southern California, but we see it in the Great Basin. We see it in other places. And this is becoming a major, major problem that no one has a really good solution for, because it's very, very difficult to get rid of these invasive grasses once they become established. And this is just to push that point home a little bit more. The increase of non-native grasses on a site has the effect of greatly expanding the fire season and the probability of a repeat fire. So we can see a feedback loop start to develop, where once fire frequency fire intervals shorten too much, they start to promote those non-native grasses taking over. And once those non-native grasses get established, they tend to beget more fire. So you get this positive feedback loop. Now, all of this is important to understand, because I want to go back to that idea of, well, and you'll probably hear this. You'll hear this over and over if you haven't before, but it's like, well, why didn't we just do prescribed burning? Why didn't we do this or that? Why didn't we clear the brush before this big fire happened? If we had just done that, the brush was all too dense and old, and that's why the fire was so big. The thing is, we've seen time and time again where one fire completely burns through an area that had just burned a few years previously. So that would be an area, like this is a good example, the Esperanza fire of 2006, 71% of the silver fire in 2013 occurred in the same footprint as this Esperanza fire in 2006. And we see that all the time. In San Diego County is a really good, unfortunately good example of this. We see it with the 2003 Cedar fire. A huge chunk of the Witch fire that occurred in 2007 occurred in the same area, the same footprint that had burned just 4 years previously in the Cedar fire. So just because an area burns, or because it's younger, or it has less vegetation, or it's not as dense, something like that, it doesn't really matter when the wind conditions are 80-mile-per-hour winds and we have extreme heat and it's been really dry for 9 months previously, and the relative humidity is 2%. All of this sort of naturally goes into this conversation about, well, what about Native Americans? What were they doing historically? What about cultural burning? And there's no doubt that there was quite a bit of cultural burning, a lot of very intense. How to put this? There was a lot of fire use by Native Americans historically prior to colonization, especially in areas that were well settled, right? So think about the LA Basin or the coastal plain in San Diego County, valleys that have year-round water sources. Those are the areas that would have been most intensively managed with fire. And those are also the areas that we have since colonization developed heavily with urban areas and agriculture, and things like that, right? And so a lot of that intensively managed landscape of the pre-colonization era, we've lost that because of development over the last couple of hundred years. And it's really important to understand that there's this desire to go back to that. And it's really, really difficult because, and this is from this really good book called Valuing Chaparral, and there's this whole chapter about this, and it ends with saying that in Southern California, returning, cultural burning at a landscape scale in chaparral areas is very tricky and problematic and ecologically in a lot of ways, because we now have this issue of overly frequent fire, coupled with the fact that we have all these non-native grasses and weeds. And so historically, if let's say that people were burning a certain area to grow a certain food, they could type convert that area from chaparral to some other ecosystem type. Maybe it's coastal sage scrub or some grassland or savanna type, and it's still all native plants. Now, when that happens, you're converting it from one ecosystem to a different ecosystem that tends to be dominated by non-native plants. And ecologically, that is not an ideal situation. I do just want to mention briefly, we've got this other issue. It's not just people are sort of advocating for more prescribed fire or things like that may be inappropriate for chaparral. There's a lot of efforts to put out more fuel breaks on ridge lines, out in remote areas. This is from your neck of the shrubs. I think this is the South Main Divide fuel break in the Cleveland National Forest. This is what it looked like right after it had been cut. This was mostly hand cutting. You can see the chaparral. This is what this whole area looked like beforehand. And I just want to say, there have been a lot of studies on Southern California fuel breaks in chaparral and how effective or not effective they are. And what we find over and over again is that these remote fuel breaks are just not very effective at stopping the spread of these large wind-driven fires. And so they're not very good at protecting communities, and they can give people a false sense of security. You just remember that fires tend to move fast across the landscape, not just because of a wall of flames moving across the landscape, but because embers can spot miles ahead of a fire and start spot fires. And then those move up ahead of the fire, and then those fires meet. And it's a very complicated system. And fuel breaks don't stop the wind, and they don't stop embers from blowing. Here's another very recent paper that also found that fuel breaks can be not very effective under these extreme conditions. And I just want to show you an example of this. This is the Main Divide fuel break. This is Lake Elsinore up here. This was in 2009 before they had implemented a fuel break here. And this is in 2012, right after it was constructed. And you can kind of see it there. I hope you all can see that outline where it looks quite different than the surrounding vegetation. And then a fire occurred, started way over here, blew right through that fuel break on its way to Lake Elsinore. And this is quite literally the main thing that this fuel break was designed to try to stop, was a fire moving from over here into this community here. And it did not work at all. And this was not even a very extreme fire. When we think about what tends to drive extreme fires, not a very large fire, not being driven by very extreme winds. It's blowing in the opposite direction where we'd see Santa Ana winds blowing. So yeah, that's just one of many examples. I'll skip ahead a little bit, just because I'm running out of time. I want to mention that one of the other problems that we have in Southern California, especially in your area down here, is we have been expanding the wildland urban interface. So this is the most dangerous place from a fire perspective for where we build homes. This is right at the interface between wildland vegetation and these and more urban core areas. And all the red that you see, all the yellow is already WUI, that we call it the WUI, wildland urban interface, WUI that has been around since before 1990. And then if you look at the red, that's all WUI that has expanded since 1990. And what's crazy, this is what really blows my mind, is if you look at the black areas, that's all new wildland urban interface since 1990 that had been built. Those are all new communities that have been built in areas that had burned over the previous 40 years. So we're literally building homes in areas that had just burned. It's like building on floodplains that had just had a major flood. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And when we think about community protection, I'll just kind of wrap it up here. Homes do not burn usually because of a wall of flames coming through from, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting my timer to beep at me. I don't know if you guys could hear that. So usually the way homes burn is from embers that are sometimes driven, they're coming out a mile or more ahead of a fire, and they get into homes through vents, through windows, through door cracks, they get into these areas along the side of homes, and they cause flames to be then directly on the side of the house. And this is why we really have to focus on structure hardening. We have to get resources to communities, to people that need them, to be able to retrofit their homes and prepare against this ember attack. And there's a lot of science that really supports this and some other approaches that don't involve having to go out and do these big remote vegetation removal projects, clearing the brush, as people will say, out in the mountains. I'm going to leave it there because I've been talking for 30 minutes exactly, according to my very loud timer that just rang in my face. I do have this whole other section, and it's about where funding is going and what sort of is happening at the political, in the political sphere about how to deal with fire. There's one bill that I think is really important. That is a problem. It's a very problematic federal bill, and it's working. It just passed the House, and it's working its way through the Senate. I'd be happy to talk about that, but but I want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So I'm happy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is great. It's such excellent information. And yes, we can take questions, and then if there is additional time you want to expand on some of those things, because I think people are concerned about what things we should be fighting, at a legislative level. I did have, I'll kick it off with questions. I noticed when you did your presentation regarding the Palisades and Eaton Fire, you did an overlay of the topography where it was basically you were showing kind of every 30 to 50 years, there's a fire literally coming through the exact same area. And so I'm guessing that's similar here. We're mostly in North County, San Diego, and then a few from, San Diego proper on this call. But in addition to the wind and the dry conditions, it's the topography, right? So it's going to keep kind of funneling to the same location.
Yeah, I mean, as long as an ignition occurs. If you're worried about your community, for example, as long as an ignition occurs upwind of your community during an extreme wind event under very dry conditions. So we have extreme wind events all the time, right? During the winter, we have Santa Ana winds. In fact, the brunt of the Santa Ana wind season doesn't coincide with the dry season. There's a part of it that coincides with the dry season, and that's the late fall, and unfortunately this year into January. That's where we see large fires in Southern California. And you can see that in the 2003 fires in San Diego County, the October firestorm down there. The thing is, we have extreme winds. I mean, I'm sure you have experienced this where it's a cold, wet, things are kind of wet outside from the rain a week before, and we have 70-mile-per-hour winds, and it just feels crazy. All the palms are blowing. And there's no fires those days. And that's because everything is wet. Everything has high moisture, humidity levels, relative humidity levels are high. Even if you had an ignition on those days, it's very unlikely that you have any substantial fire spread because of that wet vegetation. So in October, though, or September or November or December, whatever month it is where we haven't had rain since April or March, and we have 70-mile-per-hour Santa Ana wind events, 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and we have an ignition from power lines or whatever, you're going to have a fire that spreads very quickly, and it gets very large very fast. And as fires become, this is another thing. Once fires become large, even when the winds die down, every little bit of growth around these very large perimeters equates to a lot of acreage burned. And so people, I think, get confused, like, why is the fire still growing so much? It's not even really growing that much. It's just if you think about a circle, as it gets bigger, it's not a linear relationship with area, right? As long as that radius is growing just a little bit, the area is getting a lot bigger. And so we see that even outside of these, once the winds die down too. But yeah, short
It makes
story.
me nervous because I'm in a home that was built in the 70s, but it's on the wildland interface, sort of right where the Witch Creek fire stopped before it got to our house. So I back up to Harmony Grove, Elfin Forest area, which is.
Oh, I love that area. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Debbie, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. So I live in a more urban part of San Diego and University City area. And I do a lot of habitat restoration. So I'm always getting rid of fan palms and Mexican, and Canary Island date palms, palms that are ubiquitously planted and then ubiquitous in our riparian areas where they're highly invasive. And I just feel like there's no leadership anywhere about get rid of your damn fan palm on your property and your neighbors and the ones on the park and the city grows in the parks. And I guess I'm wondering, like, how, I mean, you see the pictures, with the flying palms and stuff, but how major of an issue do you think that is, especially in more urbanized areas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's something that everywhere in Southern California is grappling with, and not just from a fire perspective, but just from an ecological perspective. I mean, we've grown accustomed to palms sort of being this iconic emblem of Southern California, even though basically none of them are native, except for, of course, we have our one native palm out in the desert, and that's not quite the same thing. But yeah, they pose a risk, and I think we saw that with the Palisades fire, especially, and also probably the Eaton fire. But ecologically speaking too, they're not providing, they do provide habitat for some things. We know bats roost in palms, and we know I've seen acorn woodpeckers make a mess out of palms.
Barn owls like them, and Orioles do.
Sure.
I had a family of great horned owls in my fan palm last year.
Yeah, they
Totally.
owls do like them.
And that's what I think I come across the most is we have this tendency like, oh, well, they are, I know this family of crows loves my palm over here, and the acorn woodpeckers like it here, and the barn owl likes it there. They all like coast live oak as well. And that is a much better species to have from every angle you could possibly look at it. From a fire perspective, that's a better species to have. Those are extremely resistant and resilient species. So not only are they fire resistant, their evergreen canopies can catch embers. I think that they're great to have in a defensible space profile around a structure, not necessarily touching the structure or overhanging it. But they can catch embers from reaching your structure or from reaching, areas right next to your home. And if they do burn, they can lose their entire canopy, in a high intensity fire, and then still redevelop it through something called epicormic sprouting, or they can resprout from their base, or they'll do both. And so it's actually kind of hard to kill a coast live oak with fire. And then they support just an incredible amount of species, including all of the ones we just mentioned, and then countless insects and lichens and things like that. So I think as palms will die over time from this or that, we have to really think critically in Southern California about, do you replace them with more palms, or do we replace them with native species like coast live oak? And I think that's that's going to be a very important topic for the next several decades, I would say.
But why isn't it already? Like, do you know any city or that's been willing to actually go out and say, take, I'll pay you $100 to every person that takes down a palm. I'll pay them $100 and it will help everybody out. So I just don't know.
Well, Debbie,
Yeah.
we are in, they're not paying people, but it is a discussion that's happening in Encinitas with a
Good.
native plant ordinance where we're looking at, putting some parameters around all this new construction that's happening, and in particular, communities that might be built like newer ones out where I live, what they can plant, and having real restrictions on it. The problem is so much of our area has been built out already, but it's trying to turn that back a little bit.
Also,
Mike, I
yeah.
see you have.
For those of you who got our most recent High Sierran, I actually had a piece in our fire safe themed High Sierran about the coastal live oak and its fire protective qualities. And there's been talk about doing a campaign with the North County group to try to get Vista to commit to planting live oaks instead of eucalyptus or palms in all city property going forward. So this is something, for those of you who are interested in getting involved on an issue at your city level, I mean, if people are interested in taking this on, this is something we can look at doing, but it takes, people stepping up and saying, this is something we're interested in. We actually have somebody who's offered to donate oaks pretty much for free if we can get a grant, basically, and he's already propagated tens of thousands of live oak seedlings, and he's honestly just looking for anybody to take them. So
Yeah.
we have a supplier, we have interest. So if people are interested, please feel free to step up and take this on.
Don't forget about their,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, don't forget about their shade qualities too. Like that they provide so much more shade. I mean, from an urban shade perspective, urban forestry perspective, coast live oak makes just a wild amount of sense for our cities, and especially our urban areas in Southern California. And I'll never understand why palms, I guess they just look cool and they looked good in Instagram. I mean, this is before Instagram. I don't know. They looked good in movies. Yeah, I'll never really understand it.
Yeah. Plus you have to trim them all the time. They're a pain.
Oh yeah, I know. That's the other thing.
The issue is, Debbie raises a good point about the money piece, because like, for instance, where I am, it's a larger, it's more rural. The property that we bought, which was right before the Witch Creek fire, we ended up taking down 60 palms.
Oh my God.
Queen palms. And now we still have about, I don't know, a bunch of Western fan palms. And, it's a lot to cut those down little by little. We've been doing it, but then I think about like the main road that we're off of, which is the only way in and the only way out, is lined from top to bottom on Fortuna Ranch Road with eucalyptus. So if a fire comes through, it's like we're going to be making the drive with the flames on both sides of the road. It's not ideal. I do see there is a question that Nancy asked in the chat. Should I go ahead and read that, or Nancy, do you want to ask that? Maybe I'll go ahead and read it. She was saying, why is it that non-native plants take over after fires? And the example in the Malibu slide you showed, and where do they come from? Why aren't the native plants the dominant ones?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I will I want to be clear. I've spent a lot of time in post-fire areas in Southern California and other areas as well. The farther away, the more remote you are, the farther away from a road, from a trail, from human disturbed areas, the less likely you are to see non-native plants. And I've been in places when I've really put myself out there to get away from a road or something where I'd be hard pressed to find a single non-native plant. And that's after a fire just burned through and all this regrowth is happening. The problem is multifaceted, right? So in an area, even in a remote area that has burned, in 1 year, and then 5 years later, it burned again, we can see that situation happen where all those obligate seeders, those plants that can't resprout and they rely on a dormant seed bank, if that dormant seed bank gets completely depleted through germination for that first fire, and then there is no seed bank left after for the second fire, then those plants aren't going to come up. They're not going to start shading out other plants. And so that's when grass seed, especially grass and mustard seed that is wind blown, it can come from quite far away. When normally what it would encounter is conditions where it would be okay. It would maybe germinate, but not survive because it's getting shaded out by all these other plants. It's encountering better conditions where you don't have that shading aspect, right? And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just, I see this especially close to urban areas because of the amount of disturbance that happens post-fire. I mean, I don't even know. I'm like wondering, I haven't been out to the Palisades fire, the Eden fire yet. I've only driven past them, but I imagine there is a lot of heavy equipment moving around. It's moving around debris. It's from a plant perspective, it's going to be a mess, right? Because a lot of soil disturbance is happening. Things that may have already germinated, like they were germinating, they've probably been run over or they've been moved. So that's the other reason too, is that humans, we tend to, and sometimes for good reason, because we've got to go and remove destroyed homes and things like that. And I completely understand that. But other times for not good reasons, we go out into these post-fire areas and we tinker with them and we try to manage them and make them better or something. And we end up just tracking in more non-native plants, seeds. And just next time you hike on a trail, especially in a remote area, just notice all the non-native grasses along the trail. It's amazing. It does not take much for us to track seeds and, non-native seeds on our boots, on bicycle tires, on, vehicle tires, all sorts of things. So, and again, stuff just moves around in the wind. But
yeah, I think in the case of Palisades too, there was that huge rainstorm shortly after that fire. And so a lot of that soil was just running down the hillsides.
and that's an interesting thing that I've always wondered too. We've seen, like we had it in the Santa Ynez Mountains above Montecito, and in that area after the Thomas fire, we had these major debris flows. And so, yeah, a lot of material moves in those situations, but I've been in a lot of those areas where the material came from, and it's all mostly native plants that have still continued to thrive. I think there's an issue. There's a thing where like a lot of the plants are able to resprout. And so they're still there, their root systems are still there, and they're able to persist. But I think the other thing too is that a lot of native seeds that I talk about germinating, manzanitas are a great example of this. Usually you'll find their seedlings coming up in clusters, and those are from rodent caches. So they've actually buried those seeds to eat later, but then they forget, or the rodents get killed in the fire or something like that. And they bury them just deep enough that they don't get damaged by the fire and they don't get damaged by that post-fire, soil movement from rain. But not so deep that they can't germinate and be able to grow up to the surface. So there are cool things that it's not always so intuitive. And I learn something new every time I go into a post-fire area, just by sheer observation. It's fascinating.
Debbie.
Yeah, I would just like to say, so I work in Rose Canyon, which is in the city of San Diego now, and there was ranching there for probably 80 years. And so basically where you've had ranching, generally they've just, the cows and horses have just destroyed all the native plants. And the other thing is that the ones that are invasive, like mustard, they tend to sprout the second it rains in November, December. They're off and going, and they're like 6 feet tall in 3 months. And all of our natives are very slow growing, tend to be, and much lower growing. And also I think this is true for a lot of the non-natives. The mustard put out seeds that can last for like 8, 10, 12 years in the soil. So you can get rid of them all one year, we get rid of them all, and they're right back the next year just as dense. They just grow very, very densely. So a lot of our natives are just outcompeted by the non-natives due to the way that the different growth of what's
Right.
non-native. And
Well, and people don't understand, it's actually sad but true. A friend of mine several years ago, when we had that massive super bloom of all the wildflowers, um, uh, sent a photo when on her drive up to see the wildflowers of a field of mustard.
oh, yeah,
And
I
said,
get
"This is
that
my favorite time of
constantly.
year. Look at how beautiful it is." And I was like, no,
I meet
no.
people in Rose Canyon, they say, oh, it's so beautiful. What are all those? And then you mix in radish, which is purple and white flowers, and they just think it's dazzling. It's so beautiful.
Well, in fairness to many people, myself included, originally an East Coast person. So a lot of people move out here. They think warm Southern California, it's got to be beaches and palm trees. You know, there's just not a lot of education on that topic. Nancy had a
that's
follow-up.
what's so
Oh, go
I
ahead.
just want to say that's what's so important about having these kind of presentations and discussions and spreading that kind of information about the importance of native plants, of these ecosystems, and trying to lift the veil a little bit on the mystery around them. And you know, when people they love seeing those fields of mustard. Once you understand what mustard is and you know what it is doing, you can't look at it the same way. But Sally, like I see behind you, it looks like some ceanothus, maybe some Ramona, maybe. I don't know which species that is.
That one was a volunteer in my yard, believe it or not.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well,
So I think it's like yeah, no
it's
water.
it's a beautiful plant. And if you go into the elfin forest at the right time of year, you will see just slopes covered in white, you know, from your, I forget what species it is, Vericosus, Ceanothus vericosus, maybe. And just trying to get people to understand, like, there is an amazing, gorgeous thing happening out here. And it's not mustard, and it's not your radish. It's not, you know, some other plant. And I do see what you're saying, Sally.
Will say,
Nancy's question is really important. So I want to make sure to answer that too.
yeah, the defensible space. She said, Nancy's asked again, that she's required to clear a defensible space around her cabin near Tahoe, with the idea of embers being the fire starter of a house. Is defensible space perhaps not a great idea?
So great question. Very good observation. Defensible space, still a very good, very important part of all of this. All of it, everything we talk about for community protection, for home protection, it's all about reducing your risk. Nothing reduces your risk to zero. Nothing reduces it all at once. It's just like chipping away at your ignition risk. And I think the most important things to chip away at that risk is to focus on structure hardening, retrofitting, you know, vent screens, making sure you have double paned or tempered glass windows. There's so many other things that you can do to the home itself, and that reduces your risk quite a lot. Defensible space, though, is not necessarily to prevent embers or even a wall of flames from getting to your house. It's really about giving firefighters some room to be able to set up and put water on your house. That doesn't always happen, and we see that very clearly with things like the Eaton fire or the Palisades fire. Once you have that domino effect where some homes start burning, and then they start sending out embers to their neighbors, and then you get the domino, right? There's not going to be a lot of firefighters that are going to be able to post up at different houses, but maybe out in Tahoe, where your cabin is, especially if it's a little bit sparse, not as densely constructed, you can have situations where you might get your own engine crew that really post up around that cabin. You want to make sure that they've got space to do that work. But I will say this, part of defensible space, which you may even think of it as more of part of structure hardening, but it's kind of like a blend between the two, structure hardening and defensible space, is what we call zone 0. It's that first 5 feet around the structure. That is making sure you don't have anything flammable in that first 5 feet, because embers, they can get into your home, and that's one of the main ways that they actually ignite homes, but they can also get into like your mulch bed right next to your home. And you don't want direct flames on the side of your house ever. That's just not a good situation. And so having that zone 0 cleared of flammable material, not just vegetation or mulch, but also like wood piles, deck chairs, things like that, those are all very important things that are helping prevent or reduce that risk of ignition from windblown embers.
Exactly. John.
Oh, I see your ceanothus, and I read, you probably already said this, I'm sure you know this, but I want to say it. I read that ceanothus, toyon, and oaks are relatively fire-resistant plants. And also flame cypress are one of the most fire-resistant plants because they're not native, I guess, but they hold on to a lot of water in their little leaf-like things. Anyway, that's
Good. The fire resistance of plants is a really tricky thing. I mean, yes, some plants they have higher moisture content than others during the dry time of year. I think a really good example of that is like, think about laurel sumac. You have laurel sumac down in your area. Think about a laurel sumac compared to chamise, for example. Chamise, really tiny leaves, lots of very densely packed leaves all over their stems, super tiny. Think about laurel sumac. What do they have comparatively, leaf-wise? Anyone know?
bigger leaves.
Big old leaves, right?
Thinner.
And that's because they have much deeper roots. They're tapping into deeper groundwater than most other plants around them. And so they don't have to they don't have to have the same strategies of dealing with that very dry Mediterranean system where we get months and months at a time with no water because they're able to tap down into this groundwater down lower. And so they tend to have a little bit higher moisture content. But the thing is, when a fire comes through, and if it's coming through chaparral, it doesn't really matter. If it's the right conditions, generally, everything's going to burn. And I think we have to be really careful, like to acknowledge that and accept that that is the norm and that's how it's going to be. When you start thinking about what's around your home, that's where I think those kind of choices can make more sense. You know, instead of having chamise all right around your structure, maybe go with something else, right? And it's not to say that chamise is always flammable, because again, in the winter, I don't mean this literally, but try to light a chamise on fire. It's going to be very difficult to do because it has a lot of moisture. So it's a complicated subject. And I think about resistance and resilience too, right? So resistance is about something being able to survive without changing much, right? So think about a plant that a fire comes through and it doesn't kill it. It doesn't really do much damage to it at all. It doesn't destroy its canopy or anything like that. That's resistance. Resilience would be the plant changes dramatically, but it's able to regrow and sort of get back to what it was before the fire at some point. So coast live oaks, very good example of both resistant and resilient. They can be quite resistant. They have all these characteristics that make them resistant. But if they lose their canopy in a really intense fire, they're very resilient. They will regrow their canopy. They can resprout from their base. So what we want in our communities, though, we want resistance and resilience. We want our homes to be resistant, and we want our communities to be resilient in case things are, we do have these big problems. So we see that with like Altadena and the Palisades, very little resistance. The resilience, and I'm not talking about like human spirit resilience type of that. I'm saying like our ability to quickly, respond and get back to some degree of normalcy. It's very, very difficult, right? With that level of destruction. And so all these things that we talk about for protecting communities, they also go toward making communities inherently more resistant and resilient. Long-winded answer to, I'm not even sure a question, but yeah.
Ron.
Oh, I just want to mention in the April High Sierran, which is our fire issue, I did one article on home hardening and defensible space, and another one around evacuation and some of the apps you should use. So it's all in the fire issue that just came out.
This topic, by the way, for those who don't know, is near and dear to our Sierra Club chapter's heart, because our chapter chair, Lisa Ross, her family, her daughter and her young family lost their home in the Eaton fire. And they have been dealing with all the aftermath of that, which has been obviously devastating and very challenging to find a new place to live. The one thing I wanted to mention back that we talked about a little bit, Debbie brought it up in terms of like, encouraging, I think it's human nature that people see the fire in LA and say, we have to clear all the brush, we have to chop everything down, we have to make all this defensible space because it feels like you're doing something. And I will say in our North County coastal cities, we have a new fire chief, Josh Gordon, who's been going around and speaking at all the city councils. I don't think he's Carlsbad and Oceanside, but I know he works with Solana Beach and Del Mar and Ensenada. And he's been really excellent at sort of starting to change the dialogue about what we need to do. And in fact, over the last few days, they had all the fire teams in from the area were back up above where I live practicing in and learning, okay, this is the terrain we're going to deal with. This is likely where a fire might come through and what's going to happen. And to the point you made, Bryant, about defensible space, Chief Gordon was very clear that if they drive up to your house and they can't easily access the house or run around the house with their hose, they're going to drive on by in a devastating fire where there's lots of, they've just got to let it go. They can't take that risk or the time. And so it made us really think here at our house, we have to have a very wide path all the way around to make it easy. He also mentioned one other thing that some people might be thinking about is there was a lot of coverage after the LA fires about someone who saved his house with a sprinkler system that like rotated around, that he set up. And he was making the point that, if everybody starts doing that, like, please don't be running all of your water. Leave hoses out and we'll fight the fire, but we can't have, entire neighborhoods draining all the water system. So I don't know thoughts about that, but Michael,
I will say if you have, there are ways that you can do self-contained sprinkler systems where like you collect rainwater during the year, you have a cistern or something and a pump. I mean, there are ways you could do it where you're not having to tap into the main system, and you absolutely will see like water pressure is going to drop when people are all using their hoses at the same time, or even when firefighters are out in a neighborhood and they're on multiple structures. There's a lot of talk in LA about water issues, and I think a lot of that is quite distracting actually from the bigger issues, which is the lack of home hardening and just the lack of like community level awareness of what is actually happening with these fires, why they occur, and what it is that is actually effective. So yeah, when I see talks about empty reservoirs and the pressure dropping under 100-mile-per-hour winds, none of that really matters that much in the grand scheme of things. What matters is whether or not structures are resistant to embers and whether or not you have sort of the whole community is resistant to embers. And that is the thing that I think we as a society, and especially at our state and federal government levels, I think we have like quite drastically failed at that, and we have to do better. And I am seeing at the federal level, especially, doubling down on the same things we've been doing for decades that haven't been working. And that's something like the Fix Our Forest Act. It's a continuation of the wrong approach, and that's a major issue. Sorry, Michael, I know you have a question too.
No, that's actually great that you bring that up. Kind of going to what Sally was saying about the fact that people feel a need to do something. I think actually focusing on the tree ecology question is something that is actually very actionable in people's lives, and it's something that people even in this group can start thinking about as it relates to their own homes, and also something that on a community level can be taken on, because both palms and eucalyptus are even worse. Eucalyptus yeah. So, and from the aesthetic perspective, if you drive up towards Temecula, the oak trees become the dominant canopy in that part of the area, and it's still beautiful, right? There are really no good reasons not to be working on these things. And thank you, Bryant, for bringing up the Fix Our Forest Act. That's something that the Sierra Club is actively opposing in DC. It is a disastrous piece of legislation. And if any of you are interested in learning more about it, the Sierra Club has a lot of resources for dealing with those things. But I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to.
I had a whole section on it, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get to it, but I want to say, and this is not any of your fault, but
Yeah.
I think it might be south of you. Scott Peters, the representative,
don't get us started.
Democratic the House version, and it still just kind of blows my mind that you have Padilla now sponsored. The Senator Padilla has sponsored it in the Senate, and I just want to real quick, if you guys don't mind, I want to illustrate the problem here. Yeah, I feel like Patricia, you really want to say something? You're on mute,
she's
though.
I'm gonna
muted,
say-
Jen.
oh yeah, oak trees. They drop acorns, which attract squirrels, which are the main food of rattlesnakes. And near my son's house, there's a whole row of oak trees along the street lining a canyon, and they saw a dead rattlesnake right by the sidewalk. And so I think, yeah, there might be more rattlesnakes if you have oak trees around your house.
Hey, well, that just means you gotta learn how to live with rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are awesome. You have a couple cool species down in your area, and hey, if you are worried about rattlesnakes, then I would become a proponent of king snakes. King snakes, really cool. They eat rattlesnakes, and also great native species. But I just want to say I want to say real quick about FOFA, because there's this amazing parallel with 2003, and I assume a lot of you were in the area in 2003 with the Cedar Fire. There was a bill called the Healthy Forest Restoration Act that had been in the House, had passed the House, and was kind of sitting in the Senate for many months. Didn't know if it was going to actually move forward in the Senate. The Healthy Forest Restoration Act, very similar to Fix Our Forest Act, not nearly as bad, but kind of pushing the exact same stuff. And it's where you can draw a line with a lot of our like remote vegetation removal projects. A lot of it you can trace back to the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003. So again, the House passes it, I don't know, sometime earlier in the year. And then the 2003 firestorm happens in Southern California. Within a few days, the Senate passes it. They are debating it. They're not debating it, but they're all up there talking about how if we don't pass this bill, we're going to see fires like this year after year. And it's just, and what happens this year, right? The Healthy Forest Restoration Act passed the House last year, didn't go anywhere in the Senate. This year, the LA fires happen. Suddenly, the Fix Our Forest Act passes the House. They've got 10 more Democrats in California that who voted no last year, like a few months before, but then voted yes after the LA fires. It's a lot of it is just like, it's that wanting to show you're doing something, but we keep doing the wrong thing. And it is so very, very frustrating. And so I encourage you to reach out to your representative and say, why did you vote for Fix Our Forest Act? But more importantly, reach out to Adam Schiff and Senator Padilla, our two senators, and urge them to vote no, at the very least, to try to get some good amendments to make it less bad. And it seems like Michael knows a lot on the Sierra Club side of things, like what you guys are doing. I just put in a link to our own action alert. It's very general, so it'll go to both senators if you sign it up, sign it. But you should, if there are other action alerts through Sierra Club, you should do those as well. But yeah, let them know. I could go on and on about the Fix Our Forest Act and why it's a problem, and it applies to chaparral too. It's not just about forests, and that you can thank Representative Lauren Boebert for that, because she was able to push through an amendment that essentially made it so that a lot of the problematic stuff in the bill could be applied to ecosystems like chaparral. So yeah, it's a major problem. Big
Yeah.
issue.
And thank you for articulating the issues about that, because it definitely is a focus of Sierra Club, and something that I think, you know, we should talk about locally, of how to get more people talking about that issue. So, you know, Bryant, you've been awesome. I appreciate everybody who's staying up late and on this Zoom. It's clearly a super interesting topic, and the research that you have is just so great. I can't thank you enough for doing this. What I'm wondering is, typically what we do is we'll send out a copy, you know, we'll email out to everybody who participated in this presentation, a video of our meeting tonight, which would include your slides and whatnot. If there's anything additionally that you want for us to include, email it to me, and I can make sure that we do that, if that's okay with you.
Sure, I can do that. Yep.
Yeah, because I think that there was a lot of information on those slides, and I know that there's going to be some folks who are going to want to, you know, go back and look at that more carefully. And we are lucky to have one of our local city council members who's been on this call the whole time, which makes me happy, because she works with a lot of these politicians that need to understand this information more clearly. So I'd love to be able to take some of that and you know, make sure that Teresa has it, and any other council members that might want to do that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send. I can even share the slides in like a PDF format if that would be helpful. And the other thing is that ForestWatch, we have a YouTube channel at Los Padres ForestWatch. Just if you just Google or YouTube, Google, I don't know, search on YouTube, Los Padres ForestWatch, you can see some of the other webinars I have done, probably one of the ones that you saw, Sally, a month or two ago. And so those, I went into more depth on certain things like the LA fires. I think on some of those webinars, I went into much more depth about those. It sounds like you might have seen one of those, Sally. So that would be another thing for people if they wanted to go listen to me talk even more, which I don't know why people would, but if they want to do that, they can.
Yeah, that's great. So last chance, anyone have any more questions before we release Bryant? All right,
Thank you
everyone.
very
Yeah,
Thank you.
so much. Really appreciate it.
Just one final plug. This Saturday, 11 a.m., Waterfront Park. Hope to see you there.
Yes, and we should have some information about the Healthy Forest Restoration Act and why people should vote no on it at our table.
Hey, it's nice talking with you. Thanks for having me. And thank you, Sally, for reaching out. I'm always happy to come back and talk again. And if any of you are in other groups that would like a similar presentation, I pretty much never say no to presenting to groups. So yeah, that doesn't mean anything bad. It just means that I'm a glutton for presenting about fire. I like talking about it. Yeah.
It's great information.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.